What is going on, guys? This is Jake at That Fit Friend, and today I'm going to be reviewing the Under Armour SlipSpeed Training Shoes. So this is easily the most unique training shoe I have reviewed in all of 2022. It's been super fun to test just because it is so different than other training shoes. So 3 pros that I have with this model is number 1, the convertible heel construction and its versatility for daily wear and training. So with the SlipSpeed training shoes, the main claim to fame is this convertible heel. So essentially you can pop this heel in and you could slide your foot in and wear this as a slip-on shoe because you have a boa lacing system to help secure that fit to give you a nice level of security if you're just wearing it as a slip-on. But then you could also pop this heel up and lock it down with the boa lacing system to give you a slightly more secure fit for training. So I think if you're an athlete or lifter and you really prioritize having one shoe that you can just wear to the gym and then out and about as a slip-on, but then also use for a training shoe, I think you'll like this feature because growing up, I was that kid for hockey dryland sessions. I would roll in with my foot crammed into my tennis shoe and ruin the boot. So realistically, I feel like this shoe is just like 17 years too late in my life. But I think if you are that lifter or athlete that wants a little bit of everything with their shoe and you also want a shoe that you could wear as a slip-on and just kind of beat up, that is a really cool feature of this model. The second pro that I have with this shoe is that overall, it's a decently well-rounded training shoe. So this shoe is not going to be your best performer in any one vertical when it comes to straight up performance, and I'll talk about that in my cons, but when it comes to giving you a decent performance for HIIT work, versatile training, some lighter lifting to moderate loading, the shoe does a pretty good job. And so despite having this convertible heel, I don't think it takes away from the shoe's overall performance. So if you are somebody who does want that training shoe for both daily wear and training, but you also need that training shoe to be good for a little bit of everything, I feel like this shoe can kind of fit that bill pretty well. And again, it does give you a nice level of stability and versatility with this flow midsole and its overall upper security. The third pro that I have with this shoe is that I like that it's a shoe that you can kind of beat up and then just throw in the wash and clean. And so with this model, you actually get a laundry bag too. So you basically pop this shoe into that bag, you can throw them in the washer and it'll clean them pretty efficiently for you. So if you want a shoe, for example, just to wear out and about and kind of just beat the crap out of, and you're an athlete and you don't want to ruin like a really expensive pair of shoes, this can be a really good option for that. I also like that Under Armour is kind of thinking of these things with this model because it just adds to the overall novelty of this shoe for the athlete and lifter who does have these very specific asks with their training shoes. But that being said, let's talk about a couple of cons that I have with the Under Armour SlipSpeed training shoes. So 3 cons that I have with the Under Armour SlipSpeed training shoes is number 1, while I like the convertible heel and I think it's a pretty cool and novel idea, I'm not sold that it's going to resonate with every athlete and lifter. And more specifically, if you're somebody who prioritizes having a more structured ankle or boot in your training shoe, I don't think you're going to necessarily like the construction of the convertible heel. So with this heel here, it almost feels like it's built with a neoprene, so you don't get a ton of support. And so you also have a counter towards the top of this lip here, but then as you go back, it kind of like concaves back into the boot. And so when you're first breaking this shoe in, I don't know if you're going to experience this as well, but I was almost feeling like I was like almost sliding out of this heel. And it's a super weird sensation. Like I didn't experience heel slip in the shoe, but just that feeling kind of threw me off a little bit. And once the shoe breaks in and you get used to them, it doesn't really bother you nearly as much. And you could crank this boa system tighter too to help kind of prevent that. But again, that kind of speaks to like if you really like having a structured boot or ankle in your training shoe, I don't necessarily know if you're going to resonate with this model's boot. The second con that I have with this shoe is that while it is a pretty well-rounded training shoe, it's not going to be your best performer in any one vertical, in my opinion. So when it comes to more athletic style training, there are 2 knocks on this shoe. The first is that it can feel a little bit platformy and clunky with this thicker midsole, so it doesn't give you the most articulation. And if you like a more minimalist feel with more athletic style training shoes, I don't think you're going to really like the midsole and its performance, especially at top end work. Also, we do have a full foam exterior here on the midsole, so we don't have any rubber outsole material on the shoe. So when it comes to turf work or even concrete work, when you're doing a ton of multi-directional work, you might lose out on a little bit of traction and protection with this model's overall sole construction. When it comes to lifting, like you can do light to moderate sessions in the shoe, but with that thicker foam midsole, like you're not going to want to probably load super heavy in this model. So that is also a limitation with the shoe's performance regarding lifting. The third con that I have with the shoe is that you don't get a ton of upper volume through the toe box. And so that can give this toe box a pretty snug feeling. So I think if you have a wider foot, you might actually want to steer clear of the SlipSpeed training shoes. But if you have a narrow or neutral width foot, you should be fine. But just note that the toe box does feel a little bit snug in this model, despite the foam midsole actually having a pretty wide base. And I just think because the upper material is a little bit thicker in nature, it gives it like this more snug and tight feeling. So I don't know if that's going to resonate with everybody, especially if you have wide feet. But overall, I've really enjoyed this shoe. It's super novel and it's super interesting, and I really like that about this model, but it definitely has some limitations. But now let's talk about the performance of the SlipSpeed training shoes. So when chatting on the performance of the Under Armour SlipSpeed training shoes, I'm going to break this section into a few different parts. I'm going to talk about how this shoe performs for lifting, versatile training, short runs, and daily wear. When it comes to lifting, this model will work just fine for light to moderate sessions. So essentially, if you're training around like 315 pounds or lower, I think you'll be fine with the stability that you get out of this shoe. Personally, this would not be my go-to shoe for a ton of barbell work for two reasons. Number one, you have a pretty high stack height, so you don't get the most stability out of the shoe. But then number two, because we don't have a rubber outsole tread here, I wouldn't want to load super heavy in this model just due to slippage issues. So for example, if I'm using like heavy leg presses, or if I'm doing hack squats, or if I'm doing barbell work, this is something that kind of makes me a little nervous. On rubber gym floors, I didn't have slip issues. But again, if I'm getting super specific with my top end strength work, this is not necessarily going to be the shoe that I reach to first for that type of training, just because I think there are stronger models on the market compared to these SlipSpeed training shoes. Now, if you're somebody who wants these just for general strength work, some dumbbell and kettlebell accessory work, some lighter barbell work, or even some velocity training, this model will work just fine. And I think you will get a nice level of stability from this flow midsole, especially for those contexts and intensities, once again, that are like under that 315 pound range. You can obviously train heavier in this shoe. It's just not my go-to because I think there are stronger models on the market that will give you more stability for lifting. When it comes to versatile training, I like the shoe for the most part, and I think it's going to be a really good shoe for somebody who's a lot more casual with like their athletic style training, their HIIT work, or even like their class style training. So with this shoe, you get this flow midsole, and it gives you a nice level of pop, especially when doing plyometrics. And you also get an upper construction that is pretty secure. So if you're doing multi-directional work, for example, the upper in the toe box here gives you a nice lockdown feeling. And with this BOA lacing system, you can micro adjust the tightness that you get. So I do like that as well when it comes to security in this model. Once again, though, there are a couple of knocks with this shoe when it comes to versatile training. Number one, you don't get that much boot and ankle support. So again, if you're doing a lot of lateral work and you really prioritize having a stable boot or a more structured boot at that, that could be something that bothers you. And then also with this shoe, if I'm doing like more top end plyometric work, so if I'm really focusing on like peak velocity or really pushing the envelope with my training blocks, I personally like a shoe that's a little bit leaner and that feels a little bit more sock-like on the foot. And so with this thicker foam midsole here, it is very platformy, and so it does feel kind of clunky at times. And so if you are similar with your preferences in that context, that could be a knock on the shoe for versatile training. Now, if that's something that doesn't really bother you, then I don't think that's going to be a huge concern, but it is something that I noticed with this model when it comes to versatile training. When it comes to short runs, this model I think will work for a couple miles here and there, pre or post workout. So if you want to tack on a couple casual miles as a warm up or as a cool down, this model should work just fine. This flow midsole will give you enough of a cushioned ride and a responsiveness to make that pretty comfortable. Now, if I'm doing like top end sprint work, this would probably not be my go-to just because I don't really like the boot construction for that, and I want a leaner shoe for that. So if you are wanting a shoe for sprints on top of your athletic style training, this may not be the best option for you. Plus, you don't have a rubber tread here, so you could have slip issues depending on the surface that you're running on. But if you're doing like track style running, or if you're running on a treadmill, you should be okay with the shoe. And if you use them for outdoor runs, they should be okay as well, despite not having a rubber outsole. In the Under Armour Flow Velocity Wind 2, that shoe also has a full foam flow midsole, and mine have held up pretty well. So I don't think that's going to be the hugest concern for folks who do want to use this shoe for short runs. And then when it comes to daily wear, I really like this model, and I love that you can just slip your foot in. It makes it super easy to wear this shoe out and about. Like, I'll walk the dogs in this shoe, I'll grab coffee in this shoe, and I like that you can beat them up and clean them pretty easily. So I think that's also a perk of the shoe for daily wear. So again, I think if you're somebody who wants a shoe for a little bit of everything and you're not so specific with your training, and you also really like the idea that you can wear the shoe on a daily wear basis as a slip-on, then the shoe makes a lot of sense for those contexts. So when it comes to the price of the Under Armour SlipSpeed training shoes, you can expect to pay $150 USD. Now, I think if you're an athlete or lifter, wanting this for like the novelty of the heel construction, then that price can make more sense. However, if you're not necessarily sold on the novelty of the shoe, or you don't have the specific needs that the shoe will tackle and give you, then I think you might want to look into other models, because you can definitely find stronger performing training shoes for less than $150 USD. All right, so now let's answer the question, who are the Under Armour SlipSpeed training shoes best for? So this model has a price point of $150 USD. They're also not a training shoe that I would put into any category as being like a top performer. So who are they really best for? So I think if you have the means and if you just like the novelty of this shoe, then I would say go ahead and invest in them, because they are very unique and very different. But more specifically, I think if you're somebody who really prioritizes having a training shoe that you can wear on a daily wear basis, and you really like the slip-on feature of the shoe, but then you could also wear it for a little bit of everything, then I could see this model being a good option to explore. But again, with the boot construction and kind of with this shoe's performance and how it will start to fall off at certain levels of intensities, I would just say tread lightly and be objective with if the shoe really is going to work for your needs, especially when it comes to the performance asks that you're wanting out of them, because again, there will be some limitations with the shoe. And for $150 USD, it's kind of a big investment just to get a shoe that might not necessarily match your needs, and then you need to get another shoe to really match those needs. So just food for thought on who this model is going to be best for. So when it comes to the sizing and fit of the Under Armour SlipSpeed training shoes, I think most lifters and athletes should be safe going true to size in this model. And so Under Armour categorizes this shoe as having a regular fit on their site. And so if you have a narrow or neutral width foot, true to size is going to be your best call. Now, if you have a wide foot, once again, you don't have a ton of width up here in the forefoot. And I would say tread lightly on sizing up, because we have this boot construction. I don't want you to have heel slip issues if you go too long in the shoe and this boot doesn't give you enough support. So just food for thought for folks with wider feet. You may want to pass on this model, because I'm not convinced that sizing up will be the call, because I'm not convinced this boot is going to give you enough security. Speaking of sizing in the shoe, I do like the BOA lacing system though, and I know it can be a little bit polarizing for some folks, but I think it's pretty cool that Under Armour is playing with like more inclusive shoes when it comes to folks who might not be able to use laces, for example. So I like that about the shoe. And when it comes to giving you enough security for both wearing this as a slip-on and a training shoe, I think the BOA was a very good call, because I don't think laces would have done that justice for this shoe. So when it comes to the weight, heel to toe drop, and insole in these SlipSpeed training shoes, for my size 10 model here, we have a weight of 11.45 ounces. The heel to toe drop in the shoe is 2 millimeters, and this model does not have a removable insole. All right, so now let's do the construction breakdown of the SlipSpeed training shoes. So around the toe box here, we have a synthetic layer that gives you a little bit of additional support. And then we have this reinforced upper. And so it almost feels like a faux leather mixed with like a mesh. It's pretty heavy in nature, and it does have a nice level of ventilation through it. I wish Under Armour would actually disclose what the materials are, but they are a bit heavier. And then we also have like this internal construction here. So you have this heavier material that sits on the outside of this internal. This boot construction, and there's also the internal of the shoe, feels like a neoprene in nature. Like Under Armour once again doesn't disclose the materials, but it almost feels like a lighter neoprene when it comes to the material that it actually is. Looking at the boot construction, we have an additional counter back here, so we do have additional padding towards the top of the boot, and then you also have this convertible heel that pops up or down depending on how you're wearing the shoe. Looking at the lacing system, we have a BOA lacing system, so you can easily pop that open and then pull the shoe open to loosen them up, and you could pop that down and then crank them a little bit tighter based on your needs. We have 3 core eyelets where that BOA crosses, and then looking at the internal construction once again, we don't have a removable insole. This insole can technically come out because there is only an adhesive keeping it in, but I would suggest not doing so, because with this shoe's boot construction and how it might lack security for some folks, I don't want that insole to be sliding around on you at all, and then you lose out on this shoe's overall performance. Looking at the midsole, we have a flow midsole that extends the entirety of this shoe. And as you can see, we don't have any rubber outsole materials on this model, so it is just this flow midsole material on the outsole of this shoe as well. We have some Under Armour branding here on the lateral midfoot side, and then we have some BOA lacing system branding here, and then also some SlipSpeed branding at the top of the tongue of this model. But other than that, that's kind of the gist of this shoe's overall construction. It's a really unique shoe, and I like that there's relatively no frills to the construction outside of the unique features in this model. But if you have additional construction questions on the shoe, drop a comment down below. All right, guys, that wraps up my review of the Under Armour SlipSpeed Training Shoes. Overall, this is a pretty cool shoe. Is it going to be a shoe for everybody? No, especially for $150 USD, but they are pretty dang unique, so I could see them having a lot of utility for some lifters and athletes. If you have additional questions on this model, drop a comment down below, and as always, drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next one.